Mohenjo-Daro, the vanished metropolis of the Indus. Mohenjo-Daro, the mound of the dead, rises from the dust of Pakistan's Sindh province like a silent riddle carved in brick. A once bustling metropolis of the Indus Valley civilization whose enigmatic ruins whisper of a forgotten world that thrived over 4,000 years ago and then vanished into the shadows of history. Leaving behind streets that were straighter than any Roman road, drainage systems more sophisticated than those of medieval Europe, and a city grid so advanced that some scholars hesitate to call it anything less than miraculous. Here, in the midst of barren plains, lies the skeletal remains of a people whose language has never been deciphered, whose rulers remain unknown, and whose fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of ancient history. For while the Mesopotamians inscribed their clay tablets and the Egyptians etched their stories into stone, the Indus people left behind only a script of symbols, carved into seals and pottery, a code no scholar has yet cracked. A silent library locked away from the modern mind, mocking our attempts to read it and to understand how such an advanced civilization could rise and then dissolve into silence. The city itself, when first unearthed in the 1920s by Rakhaldas Banerjee and John Marshall, stunned the world, revealing a society whose urban planning rivaled anything humanity would construct for millennia. Its streets aligned with geometric precision, intersecting at right angles. Its houses fitted with private bathing areas and connected to a citywide sewage system. Its wells abundant and ingeniously placed, as if water management had been elevated to a sacred art. And at its heart, the Great Bath, a massive tank lined with bricks and bitumen, whose purpose remains shrouded in mystery. Perhaps a ritual site, perhaps a civic gathering space, perhaps a symbol of purification or initiation, standing there like a watery mirror of a vanished people's soul. Yet despite all the evidence of complexity, of order, of sophistication, Mohenjo-Daro offers no king lists, no heroic inscriptions, no statues of pharaohs or god-kings, leaving scholars to wonder if this was a society without monarchs, perhaps governed by councils or guilds, or if their rulers simply chose anonymity, blending into the collective rather than elevating themselves above it. A concept so alien to the hierarchical structures of other ancient civilizations that it challenges the very foundations of how we understand early urban life. And then, of course, there is the question of their disappearance. Why did Mohenjo-Daro fall silent? For while the ruins reveal an apex of order and design, they also reveal signs of sudden collapse. Skeletons lying in the streets as if struck down unexpectedly. Walls blackened by what some have called mysterious scorch marks. Entire districts abandoned in haste, as though something catastrophic had swept through and erased this vibrant city almost overnight. Orthodox theories speak of shifting rivers that starved the city of water, or tectonic movements that altered the Indus and pushed populations elsewhere, or the slow drying of the Saraswati River, a lifeline of the civilization. But other darker theories whisper of invasion, of Aryan tribes sweeping down from the north, wielding weapons and fire, leaving only echoes of their violence in the charred remains of the streets. Though modern archaeology finds little evidence of warfare on such a scale, suggesting instead that the truth lies in something even stranger. Perhaps disease ravaged the city, cholera or plague spreading through even the most advanced sewage systems, leaving bodies unburied and society undone. Yet what of the reports by some researchers of anomalous radiation levels in parts of the site, fueling speculation of an ancient cataclysm that defies explanation? Theories of explosions so intense that bricks vitrified under heat, leading French thinkers to imagine nuclear firestorms thousands of years before humanity split the atom. Perhaps an accident of lost technology, or a weapon unleashed by unknown hands, or, as some daringly suggest, the echo of a war not of this world, when gods or beings from the stars waged battles on Earth, leaving Mohenjo-Daro as a scar of their conflict. Mainstream scholars dismiss such claims, yet the allure remains. For what better place for myth to intertwine with archaeology Then here, where a people of such ingenuity could construct a city of the future in the mists of the past, then disappear so completely that only fragments of pottery, enigmatic seals depicting strange horned deities, and walls of brick remain. Who was the proto-Shiva figure that appears on some seals, seated in a yogic pose, surrounded by animals? A horned god, who may or may not be linked to later Hindu traditions, was this the earliest depiction of meditation, of transcendence, of a consciousness that reached beyond the material, or something else entirely? A deity whose meaning was lost even to those who came after? And what of the tiny figurines, the terracotta toys, the delicate jewelry, the standardized weights and measures that suggest trade, order, and bureaucracy of the highest degree? All pointing to a people who not only mastered their environment, but sought to standardize and codify life itself, creating the foundations of what we now call civilization. Yet for all their achievements, the Indus Valley people remain faceless, their skeletal remains few, their DNA revealing tantalizing links to populations across South Asia, but raising as many questions as answers. Their culture seemingly more egalitarian than others of its time. Their houses built with similar designs, their wealth less ostentatious, their temples absent, their palaces unseen. As though power was distributed, hidden, or expressed in ways we cannot recognize. A societal model that unsettles our narratives of kings and empires, suggesting an alternative path humanity might have taken, one that valued collective stability over individual glory. But if so, why did it not survive? Was it too fragile to endure cataclysm, or was it deliberately erased? Its memory drowned beneath new cultures, new languages, new gods, leaving only the bones of Mohenjo-Daro to speak for it. And here lies the greatest irony. We know more about the pyramids, more about Sumer, more about Babylon, than we do about this city whose drains still whisper with the ghosts of flowing water, whose streets still map out the minds of its builders, whose silence challenges us to admit how little we truly know of the human story. Perhaps one day the Indus script will yield its secrets, unlocking the names of their rulers, the details of their myths, the causes of their decline. But until then, Mohenjo-Daro remains a riddle wrapped in dust, a city that refuses to speak, forcing us to fill the silence with theories, with dreams, with fears, and with the haunting possibility that what was lost there was not merely a civilization, but a path for humanity itself. An alternative destiny where cities were clean, rulers were unseen, and society thrived without conquest. Until, perhaps, some force, earthly or otherwise, extinguished it, leaving us to stand in the ruins, wondering whether Mohenjo-Daro is not just the story of the past, but a mirror held up to our own fragile present, warning us that even the mightiest cities can fall into silence and be remembered only as a mystery carved into the bones of time. Chichen Itza, Secrets of the Maya Calendar. Chichen Itza, the ancient jewel of the Yucatan, rises from the dense jungle like a coded message carved in stone, a riddle of time and cosmic knowledge left by the Maya, a civilization both brilliant and enigmatic, whose obsessions with cycles, stars, and gods fused into a city that was less a settlement than a living calendar, a cosmic stage on which the heavens and the earth performed their eternal dance. And at its heart stands El Castillo, the pyramid of Kukulkan, a monument so precise that twice a year, on the equinoxes, a shadow in the form of a serpent slithers down its steps, uniting sky and stone in a spectacle that still mesmerizes those who gather to watch. Proof that the Maya were astronomers of terrifying accuracy, capable of predicting celestial events with a precision that rivals modern instruments. And yet, behind this mastery of cycles lies a darker, deeper mystery. What drove them to align their entire existence with the stars, to build temples that were calendars, to weave time into ritual, sacrifice, and blood, as though they were not merely observing the cosmos, but desperately appeasing forces within it, trying to hold back some looming catastrophe written in the heavens themselves? Archaeology has revealed that Chichen Itza was a city of plazas, temples, and ball courts, its architecture blending Toltec influences with Maya ingenuity. A place of skull racks and sacred cenotes where offerings, gold, jade, human bones, were thrown into the deep waters as gifts to Chak, the rain god, in hopes that the cycles of drought and abundance could be balanced. And from these offerings emerge fragments of a people both scientific and spiritual, rational and superstitious. Their calendars mapping not only days and months, but entire cosmic ages, Baktuns spanning thousands of years, as if they sought to situate human life within the breadth of the universe itself. The most famous of these cycles, misunderstood in modern times as predicting the end of the world in 2012, may instead represent the Maya understanding of renewal, of endings that are also beginnings. Yet one cannot ignore the eerie accuracy with which they traced celestial mechanics. Eclipses, Venus cycles, equinoxes, solstices, and the movements of stars with nothing more than sightlines, shadows, and mathematics carved into stone, raising the question, where did this knowledge come from, and why did they encode it so obsessively into their architecture? Orthodox archaeology attributes their achievements to centuries of observation and cultural accumulation. But fringe theories whisper of lost knowledge, inherited from older civilizations now forgotten, perhaps even Atlantis, whose echoes some believe reverberate in Mesoamerican myths of floods and rebirth. Or, more daring still, contact with beings not of this earth, whose serpentine forms linger in the figure of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god who descended from the sky and taught humanity the arts of civilization, an archetype mirrored across continents, in Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, Viracocha of the Andes, even the serpent figures of Sumer, as though some shared memory or encounter was scattered like seeds across human cultures, blossoming into myths that became gods. Whether gods or men, the builders of Chichen Itza wove knowledge into stone, and nowhere is this clearer than in the pyramid of Kukulkan itself, whose 365 steps mirror the solar year, whose terraces mark solstices and equinoxes, whose alignment with the cardinal directions makes it both a calendar and a compass, a structure so purposeful that one cannot stand before it without sensing the weight of intention. The feeling that this was not just a temple, but a machine of time, a bridge between the human and the cosmic. Yet Chichen Itza's mysteries do not end with calendars, for the city was also a theater of blood. Its great ball court the largest in Mesoamerica, where games were played not for sport, but for fate, sometimes ending in sacrifice, perhaps even of the winners, who offered their lives as gifts to the gods, believing that blood was the fuel of the cosmos, that the cycles of the calendar demanded nourishment, lest they falter and bring about catastrophe. A worldview both alien and eerily logical, for if the universe is a machine, then surely it must be powered by something, and for the Maya, that something was human life itself. This intertwining of astronomy and sacrifice, of science and myth, suggests a civilization that lived in constant dialogue with the cosmos. But it also raises questions about what they feared, what they believed would happen if the cycles were not observed, if the calendars were not maintained. Did they fear drought, famine, societal collapse, or did they believe that the very universe could unravel? That stars would fall and darkness consume the earth? Modern researchers suggest climate change, prolonged droughts, and internal strife contributed to the Maya collapse. And indeed, evidence from sediments and tree rings points to periods of catastrophic dryness in the Yucatan, perhaps pushing the Maya to desperate rituals at Chichen Itza's, throwing children, warriors, and treasures into its depths in pleas for rain. Yet, the very precision of their calendars suggests they knew these cycles would come, as though they were not victims of surprise, but of inevitability, trapped in the turning gears of cosmic machinery they understood but could not escape. The city itself, after centuries of power, was eventually abandoned, its plazas overtaken by jungle, its serpent shadow hidden from human eyes, until rediscovered by modern explorers who cleared the vines and stared in awe at the precision still alive in the stones. And yet, even now, we do not fully understand what Chichen Itza was. A capital, a pilgrimage site, an astronomical observatory, or something stranger, a beacon of knowledge encoded for the future, left behind by a people who understood that civilizations rise and fall, but the stars endure. In whispers, we might wonder whether the Maya, in their obsessive calculations, saw further than we dare imagine, whether their Baktun cycles were not merely records of time, but warnings of cataclysmic patterns, great resets of humanity that echo across millennia, floods, fires, collapses, and rebirths, each written into the heavens like chapters of a cosmic book. And if so, then Chichen Itza was not merely a city, but a message across time, a monument that says, "We were here, we knew, we tried to mark it for you." Whether we heed the warning is another mystery. For as we stand in the shadow of El Castillo today, watching the serpent of light crawl down its steps, we too are bound by cycles of nature, of history, of rise and fall. And perhaps, like the Maya, we cannot escape them, only witness them, only mark them, and only wonder whether our own cities someday will lie in ruins, whispering secrets to future generations who will puzzle over our obsessions and our fall, just as we puzzle now over the secrets of Chichen Itza.
The Library of Alexandria, Knowledge Lost in Flames. The Library of Alexandria, that shimmering beacon of human ambition and knowledge, stands in our collective memory as both reality and myth, a place where the wisdom of the ancient world was said to be gathered under one roof, where scrolls whispered with the secrets of civilizations, where papyri carried the voices of sages from Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, and perhaps even lands beyond our maps. A storehouse of ideas so vast and luminous that its destruction has become one of the great tragedies of human history. A symbol of how fragile knowledge can be, how easily the light of understanding can be smothered by the smoke of war, neglect, and human folly. And yet, when we peer into the ruins of Alexandria's past, we find ourselves staring into a fog of uncertainty. For we do not know exactly what was lost, nor even when or how the library truly perished. Only that it existed as part of the great Mauseon, founded, legend says, by Ptolemy II in the 3rd century BCE, inspired by the vision of his predecessor Ptolemy I, who sought to make Alexandria not just the political capital of Egypt, but the intellectual heart of the world. A city whose lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders, would guide ships to its harbor, while its library guided minds to the shores of wisdom. Ancient writers tell us that ships docking in Alexandria were searched for scrolls, their texts copied by scribes, the originals stored in the library while the copies were returned, an act both ambitious and arrogant, as though the city sought to possess the entire memory of mankind. And if the stories are true, then within those walls might have been the lost plays of Sophocles, the missing books of Livy, the mathematical treatises of Archimedes, the wisdom of the Egyptians encoded in hieratic script, the astronomical records of Babylon, the medical knowledge of India, and perhaps even forgotten histories of civilizations we no longer remember, hints of continents or cultures erased by time, preserved only in fragile ink on papyrus rolls that no longer exist. But what happened to them? Here the mystery deepens. For some accounts say Julius Caesar, during his siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE, set fire to ships in the harbor, and the flames leapt to warehouses where scrolls were stored,
destroying part of the collection. Yet other sources argue that the library survived this catastrophe and met its true end centuries later, when the Roman Emperor Aurelian ravaged the city in the 3rd century CE, or when Theophilus, in his zeal to Christianize Alexandria in the 4th century, oversaw the destruction of pagan temples, or when the Muslim general Amr ibn al-As conquered Egypt in the 7th century and allegedly burned the remaining scrolls to heat the city's baths. though many historians dismiss this tale as later propaganda. Perhaps the truth is that the library did not die in a single blaze, but faded slowly, eroded by neglect, war, and shifting tides of power. Its treasures dispersed, stolen, misfiled, or simply left to rot, until nothing remained but the legend of what had been. And yet, what a legend! For the very idea of a place where the totality of human thought was gathered fills us with both longing and unease. Longing because we wonder what truths were lost, what discoveries could have propelled humanity centuries ahead, what philosophies might have changed our moral compass, what sciences could have altered our trajectory. And unease because the story of the library reminds us how precarious our achievements are, how fragile the chain of knowledge truly is. Always one fire, one war, one wave of fanaticism away from collapse. Some fringe theorists take the mystery further, suggesting that among the scrolls may have been records of advanced technologies from earlier lost civilizations, blueprints of machines, or maps of the stars drawn with precision unexplained by their time. Even accounts of cataclysms that destroyed Atlantis or other forgotten lands. Warnings of cycles of destruction and rebirth encoded in myth but recorded as history by those who survived. And if such texts existed, then their loss was not merely academic but existential, a severing of humanity from its own past, leaving us adrift, forced to rediscover truths that might once have been known. What if within those scrolls lay the formula for electricity, the principles of flight?
The secrets of medicine that could cure diseases we still battle today? What if the heliocentric model of the universe, attributed to Copernicus, had already been outlined centuries earlier in a papyrus now turned to ash? What if voyages across the Atlantic or Pacific were recorded, proof that contact between continents occurred long before Columbus, proof that human history is far older, broader, and stranger than we are taught? Such speculation dances on the edge of possibility, for archaeology has shown us time and again that the ancients were capable of wonders we once thought impossible. And so the Library of Alexandria becomes not just a symbol of loss, but a mirror of our ignorance, forcing us to wonder whether the world we live in now is but a shadow of what might have been had those scrolls survived. Yet perhaps the library is not entirely gone, for some argue that fragments of its collection were carried to other centers of learning: Constantinople, Baghdad's House of Wisdom, monasteries in Europe, or hidden caches buried in the sands of Egypt waiting to be found. And every discovery of a forgotten manuscript, every scrap of papyrus pulled from the desert, every charred roll unrolled at Herculaneum, every Dead Sea Scroll unearthed, feeds the tantalizing hope that somewhere, somehow, a piece of Alexandria's treasure endures. Still, the image that lingers is of flames, of smoke rising above the city, of knowledge curling into ash, of scholars watching helpless as centuries of thought disappeared. And in that image lies a timeless warning that knowledge is never permanent, that every library, whether of papyrus, parchment, or digital code, is mortal, vulnerable to fire, war, neglect, or the indifference of future generations. And thus the Library of Alexandria is not just a tragedy of the past, but a prophecy of the future, a reminder that we too could lose our accumulated wisdom, that our own libraries, servers, and databases could one day vanish, leaving our descendants to puzzle over ruins and fragments, just as we puzzle now over the lost halls of Alexandria, the greatest library the world has ever known, and perhaps the greatest mystery of civilization's memory. Machu Picchu, the Inca Sky City. Machu Picchu, the Incas' fabled sky city, clings to the jagged spine of the Andes like a dream carved in stone, a place both impossibly real and hauntingly otherworldly. Perched nearly 8,000 feet above sea level on a ridge between the mist-shrouded peaks of Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain. A city so perfectly harmonized with its environment that it seems to have grown out of the mountains themselves. And when Hiram Bingham brought it to global attention in 1911, following whispers from local farmers, the world stood in awe at the sight of its terrace slopes, its cyclopean walls of finely cut stone, its temples aligned with celestial bodies, and its air of timeless enigma. For though the Inca Empire had been crushed by Spanish conquest centuries earlier, this sanctuary had remained hidden, spared from destruction, a jewel locked away in the clouds, a secret that the mountains themselves had conspired to keep. And to this day, the question lingers: what was Machu Picchu really? Why was it built? And what mysteries lie encoded in its stones? Archaeologists debate whether it was a royal estate of the Emperor Pachacuti, a ceremonial center for sun worship, an astronomical observatory, or perhaps all of these at once. For the Incas were masters of blending the practical with the sacred, turning mountains into temples, rivers into ritual pathways, and cities into cosmic diagrams. And at Machu Picchu, this synthesis reaches its zenith. With structures like the Temple of the Sun, whose trapezoidal windows frame the solstices with unerring precision, or the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, a carved granite pillar that some believe functioned as a solar clock, or perhaps even a device of unknown purpose, said to hum faintly when touched, as though resonating with energies deeper than sunlight, energies some whisper the Incas understood in ways we have long forgotten. The stonework itself defies comprehension, with blocks cut and fitted so precisely that even today a knife blade cannot slip between them. And yet no mortar was used, each piece of granite sculpted to interlock in irregular perfection, creating walls not only beautiful but earthquake-resistant, structures that have survived centuries of tremors while modern buildings crumble, leading some to speculate whether the Inca inherited this technique from an older, forgotten culture. One that mastered megalithic construction across the Andes at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, where stones weighing hundreds of tons were moved and placed with a precision modern engineers still struggle to explain, raising the question, did the Incas truly build Machu Picchu from scratch, or did they restore and expand upon a site already ancient when Pachacuti reigned, a sacred place of the gods themselves, left by ancestors or perhaps visitors not of this earth? Mainstream archaeology resists such speculation, but the sense of mystery deepens when one considers the alignments encoded into the city's layout, its axes tracing not only solar and lunar events, but also the surrounding sacred mountains, the Apus, which the Incas revered as living beings, embodiments of divine power, suggesting that Machu Picchu was not merely architecture, but a living cosmogram, a microcosm of the universe, where the movements of the heavens, the flows of rivers, and the contours of peaks were bound together into one great design. And yet, if Machu Picchu was a royal estate, why build it in so remote and inaccessible a location, unless the remoteness itself was part of the sanctity, a retreat from the world where emperor and priests could commune with the divine, hidden from prying eyes, a place where rituals could unfold in secrecy, where the thin air and dizzying heights themselves acted as conduits to higher states of consciousness? And if it was instead an observatory, what exactly were they observing? The cycles of the sun and moon, yes, but perhaps also rare events, comets, alignments, or even patterns we no longer recognize. And here speculation takes us further, to theories that the Incas tracked cosmic cycles spanning not just years but ages, that they understood the precession of the equinoxes, that they marked eras of catastrophe and renewal, encoding warnings into their temples, warnings that might explain why Machu Picchu was eventually abandoned, left to the jungle, as though its purpose had been fulfilled, its time ended, or perhaps because the Incas foresaw the arrival of the Spaniards and chose to hide their most sacred sanctuary beyond reach. But if it was hidden, why did the Spaniards never find it when they scoured the Andes for gold, plundering temples and melting treasures, burning cities and crushing the Inca state? Some suggest Machu Picchu was deliberately concealed, accessible only to those who knew the mountain trails, protected by the terrain itself, a sanctuary preserved not just from conquest but from time, as though it was meant to survive, meant to wait until the world was ready to see it again. And what of the artifacts discovered there? Ceramics, tools, skeletons, evidence of a vibrant community, though not a large one, perhaps a few hundred inhabitants, mostly attendants and priests, their lives bound to rituals whose meaning is now lost, their voices silenced by the passage of centuries, leaving only bones to whisper their presence. The skeletons show signs of hard labor, of lives both devoted and burdened, but they also reveal diversity, individuals from across the empire, suggesting that Machu Picchu drew people from afar, perhaps pilgrims, perhaps chosen servants, perhaps captives offered to the gods. And among them are signs of ritual sacrifice, for the Incas, like many ancient peoples, believed blood was the bridge between humanity and divinity. And high in the clouds where the air thins and the stars burn bright, such offerings would have carried even greater weight. Yet for all these hints, Machu Picchu remains elusive, refusing to yield a single definitive answer, forcing us to navigate between archaeology, myth, and speculation. And in that ambiguity lies its power, for it allows us to imagine that this was not merely a city, but a message, a puzzle left by a people who measured life not only in years and harvests, but in alignments of stars and sacred landscapes, who built not to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it, creating a place where human hands and mountain ridges, stone and sky merged into one. Some even wonder whether Machu Picchu was a place of initiation, a university of the spirit, where chosen individuals were trained in knowledge both earthly and cosmic, a school of mysteries whose graduates carried wisdom back to the empire, or whether it was instead a portal of sorts, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where shamans and priests could cross into other realms, guided by the sun, the moon, and the ever-present Apus, communing with ancestors, gods, or beings beyond comprehension. And if such speculation seems fanciful, consider how modern visitors describe Machu Picchu, how they speak of a presence, an energy in the stones, a feeling of awe that goes beyond mere history, as though the city itself is alive, still humming with the purpose for which it was built, still whispering to those who listen. Perhaps this is why it was preserved, why it was hidden, why the jungle cradled it in secrecy until the modern world was ready, not simply to marvel at its stonework, but to be reminded that civilizations rise and fall, that knowledge can be both preserved and lost, that there are mysteries carved into mountains that no conquest, no fire, no time can erase, and that in the heart of the Andes, in the city and the sky, humanity once reached for the divine, and perhaps touched it, leaving behind a monument not just of stone, but of mystery, eternal, elusive, and waiting for us to understand. The Shroud of Turin, a fabric of faith and mystery. The Shroud of Turin, a length of linen 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, rests today in a specially designed climate-controlled reliquary within the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. Yet its presence there is less a resolution of history than the heart of one of humanity's most perplexing enigmas. For upon the cloth lies a faint, sepia-toned image of a man who appears to have been scoured, beaten, crowned with thorns, and crucified, his wounds eerily consistent with the descriptions of Christ's passion in the Gospels. And so for centuries, believers and skeptics alike have asked, is this the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, a relic imbued with miraculous imprint? Or is it instead the work of a brilliant medieval forger, a relic of faith created to inspire devotion, or something even stranger, something that defies every category we attempt to place it in? The earliest recorded mention of the shroud dates to the 14th century in Lille, France, when a knight named Geoffroy de Charny displayed it to pilgrims, already surrounded by whispers of authenticity and accusations of fraud. For even then, bishops questioned its origins, one declaring it cunningly painted, though no artist ever claimed it, no brushstrokes have ever been found, and centuries of scientific scrutiny have only deepened the mystery. For despite hundreds of studies, no definitive explanation for how the image was formed has emerged. The details are hauntingly anatomical, down to blood flows, rigor mortis postures, and scourge marks from a Roman flagrum, leading pathologists to argue that the image could not have been fabricated without intimate medical knowledge unknown in medieval Europe. Yet radiocarbon dating in 1988 delivered a shocking verdict, placing the cloth's fibers between 1260 and 1390 CE, aligning precisely with the lyrae appearance, seemingly proving it a medieval forgery. But almost immediately the testing was criticized for flaws: contamination from centuries of handling, patches from a 1532 fire in Chambéry when molten silver burned holes through the fabric, and even possible medieval repairs that blended threads, meaning the tested sample may not have been original linen at all, a possibility later supported by textile experts who identified anomalous weaving patterns in the tested corner. And so the carbon date, once hailed as final, is now regarded by many as inconclusive,
leaving the question unresolved, hovering between history and faith. And then there is the image itself, which defies logic. For under ordinary light it is faint, ghostly, but when photographed in 1898 by Secondo Pia, the negative revealed a startling positive image, a photographic inversion centuries before photography was invented, showing a hauntingly lifelike face that transfixed the world, igniting new waves of devotion and skepticism alike. And further studies with modern imaging technologies have only deepened the puzzle, for the image displays qualities of a three-dimensional topographic map, encoding depth information into the intensity of its shading, something no medieval artist could have engineered. And yet, if not artistry, then what? Theories abound. Some suggest a medieval bas-relief pressing or a proto-photographic technique involving silver salts, or even natural chemical reactions from a decomposing body. But none of these fully account for the crisp anatomical detail, the superficiality of the image, resting only on the topmost fibrils of the linen without penetrating the threads, or the absence of pigment, binder, or brush marks under microscopic analysis. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the bloodstains has revealed the presence of hemoglobin and bilirubin consistent with traumatic injury, and even type AB blood, a detail that resonates with mystical overtones when one notes that the same blood type has been identified on other revered relics such as the Sudarium of Oviedo, a cloth with its own ancient provenance, leading some to argue for a shared origin, though skeptics counter with concerns about contamination, degradation, or misinterpretation of the evidence. And so the battle of data continues, each side armed with fragments of proof, none able to close the case. But beyond science lies the realm of speculation, where the shroud has become a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest questions. Could it be that in the moment of crucifixion or resurrection, an unknown burst of energy, radiant, thermal, or even nuclear in nature, imprinted the image onto the cloth? A snapshot of divine transformation preserved in linen, a kind of supernatural photography, an echo of the moment when death was overcome. Proponents of this radiation burst theory point to experiments where high-energy ultraviolet lasers have produced faint shroud-like images on linen. Though requiring levels of energy beyond current technology, raising the uncanny possibility that the event which imprinted the shroud was not merely historical but cosmological, a singularity of human and divine intersection. Others propose more earthly origins, a secret burial shroud for a crucified man, perhaps one of many in Roman Judea, whose wounds coincidentally mirror the gospel narratives, a relic later mistaken for Christ's own, or a medieval masterpiece designed to inspire pilgrimage and devotion during times of waning faith, its genius lying not in paint but in techniques lost to history. And still others take the speculation further, suggesting the shroud encodes hidden knowledge, that the image's proportions align with sacred geometry, that subtle inscriptions or patterns may be buried within its fibers, messages from early Christians or even forces beyond human comprehension, waiting to be deciphered. And what of its journey before Lyrae?
Some traditions claim it was the mandilion of Edessa, a cloth said to bear the face of Christ and venerated in the Byzantine world, stolen during the sack of Constantinople in 1204 and carried west, its history cloaked in the fog of relic trading, crusades, and hidden treasures. Others tie it to the Knights Templar, rumored guardians of powerful relics, whose sudden downfall left mysteries of their own, perhaps including the Shroud. Yet, for all its disputed past, the Shroud continues to exert a magnetic pull on the imagination, drawing pilgrims and scientists, believers and doubters, to gaze upon its faint image and wrestle with what it means, not only for faith, but for history, for science, for the boundary between the known and the unknown. Perhaps the true mystery is not whether it is authentic in the sense of belonging to Jesus of Nazareth, but how it continues to bridge worlds, how it forces physics and theology, art and forensic science, history and myth to collide in the effort to understand a cloth that should be simple but never is. Perhaps, too, the Shroud endures precisely because it cannot be explained, because it refuses to yield a single narrative, leaving instead a liminal space where the rational and the miraculous coexist, where the faint face on linen becomes both a question and an answer, an icon and an enigma, whispering to us across centuries that some truths, whether divine or human, may never be fully grasped, only contemplated. And so the Shroud of Turin remains, half relic, half riddle, a fabric of faith and mystery, woven not only of flax and fibers, but of doubt, hope, wonder, and the eternal human longing to touch the face of the unknown.
The Copper Scroll, treasure map of the ancients. In 1952, within the dusty caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea, archaeologists stumbled upon a discovery unlike any of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. For while most of the collection consisted of fragile parchment or papyrus inscribed with scriptures, hymns, and sectarian rules, one peculiar scroll stood apart, a relic not of ink but of hammered copper sheets riveted together. Brittle with age, yet still carrying an indelible message from antiquity, a message that even now haunts the imagination of historians, treasure hunters, and dreamers. An inventory, written in Hebrew, of 64 hidden caches of gold, silver, vessels, and sacred artifacts. Their combined value estimated by some to be worth billions, a treasure so vast it strains credulity, yet so tantalizing in its specificity that one cannot help but wonder whether it is history's first treasure map, a catalog of wealth concealed in desert caves, beneath temple ruins, or deep within forgotten cisterns, awaiting discovery by those bold enough or mad enough to seek it. The Copper Scroll is utterly unlike the spiritual or religious texts that surround it. Its language terse, pragmatic, a list-maker's account rather than a prophet's vision, describing locations with precision. In the cistern in the court of the peristyle, under the stairs, 40 cubits of silver. And yet frustratingly vague, for the landmarks it references no longer exist, eroded by centuries or destroyed by conquest, leaving only rivels etched in metal. And at once questions surge. Who wrote this strange scroll? When and why? Most scholars place it in the 1st or 2nd century CE, around the time of the Jewish revolt against Rome and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, and suggest that it may catalog treasure hidden away from the advancing Roman legions, temple wealth spirited out to prevent its seizure and melting, though this theory collides with a historical paradox. For Josephus, the Jewish historian who chronicled the fall of Jerusalem, insists that the Romans seized all the temple's riches, carrying them triumphantly to Rome, where the Arch of Titus still depicts the golden menorah and sacred vessels paraded through the streets. Could it be, then, that the Romans took only what was left behind, that another portion, the most precious, had already been concealed, hidden by priests or zealots who inscribed its locations on copper, not parchment, precisely so it would endure the ages? Yet others argue the scroll could not possibly be literal, that its staggering sums of treasure, tons of gold and silver, are exaggerations or allegories, symbolic wealth meant to convey spiritual abundance rather than actual hoards. Perhaps part of an esoteric sect's vision. A coded liturgy rather than a true map, and yet the choice of copper as a medium suggests otherwise.
For no symbolic text was ever written on such a durable material. Only records meant to survive time, to outlast fire, water, decay, to endure until the appointed seekers would find it. Modern treasure hunters have long taken it literally, scouring the deserts and wadis of Israel and Jordan, metal detectors in hand. Spurred on by whispers of hidden vaults beneath Qumran, theories that tunnels connect the caves to buried chambers filled with treasure. And some even link the scroll to the fabled lost treasures of the First Temple of Solomon, supposedly hidden away when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE. A tantalizing suggestion that perhaps the Copper Scroll preserves memory far older than the Second Temple era. A chain of secrecy passed from generation to generation, guardians preserving not only wealth but sacred relics, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant itself, whispered in hushed tones as one of the hidden objects. Archaeological expeditions in the 20th century attempted to follow the Copper Scroll's directions, yet none yielded definitive discoveries, though rumors abound of finds concealed, of gold glimpsed in desert caves, of artifacts quietly removed to prevent political or religious upheaval. For imagine if the treasures of the Jewish temple, or worse, the Ark itself, were suddenly unearthed. Would such a revelation not ignite conflicts across faiths and nations, wars for ownership of the past? And so some speculate that even if caches have been found, they would never be revealed, hidden again under layers of secrecy, because the power they hold is not only material but spiritual, capable of reshaping belief itself. Yet the Copper Scroll refuses to resolve itself into certainty, its Hebrew peculiar, its directions maddeningly ambiguous, leading some to wonder if it encodes more than meets the eye. A cipher layered over plain text, coordinates hidden in wordplay, or astronomical alignments embedded in the descriptions, such that only those with esoteric knowledge could decipher the true locations. A treasure map that doubles as an initiation, where only the worthy can unlock the code. Others tie it to the Essenes, the sect often associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls, whose austere desert community may have served as custodians of temple knowledge, their mission to preserve both sacred texts and sacred wealth for the end of days, when Israel would be restored and the treasure would be returned to a purified temple. A belief that would explain why no record of its retrieval exists, because it was never meant for ordinary use but for a messianic future. And yet each possibility leaves us stranded at the edge of speculation, caught between history and myth, between the pragmatic inventory and the fantastical scale, as though the Copper Scroll itself is a riddle designed to lure the mind into endless pursuit, forever chasing treasure that may or may not exist. For if it were simply a forgery, why commit it to copper? Why hide it in Qumran with sacred texts? Why risk discovery at all? And if it is literal, then somewhere in the deserts of Judea, under stones and sands walked by shepherds and soldiers, priests and pilgrims, lies a hoard that could rewrite not only history but faith. A fortune waiting in silence, its guardians long turned to dust, its secret whispered only by a brittle scroll of hammered metal that refuses to tell us more than half its truth. To stand before the Copper Scroll today is to feel the weight not only of treasure but of mystery, of the human hunger to hide and to seek, to preserve and to reveal, to record in metal what cannot be entrusted to parchment, and to leave behind not only wealth but a puzzle, daring the future to solve it. Perhaps the greatest secret of the Copper Scroll is not whether its treasure exists, but why it still compels us. Why even now scholars and seekers hear its siren call, as though the treasure it guards is not gold, but the eternal lure of mystery itself, gleaming brighter than any metal, shining through the ages from the depths of a desert cave.
Yonaguni Monument, Japan's underwater ruins. Beneath the restless waters off the coast of Yonaguni, the southernmost of Japan's Ryukyu Islands, lies a formation that has ignited one of the greatest archaeological controversies of modern times. A massive complex of terraces, steps, platforms, and sheer walls, discovered by diver Kihachiro Aratake in 1986 while searching for hammerhead sharks. A discovery that seemed at first like an underwater curiosity, but soon grew into a riddle that defies easy answers. For the so-called Yonaguni monument appears to be both natural and artificial at once, as if the ocean has concealed the ruins of a forgotten city or else shaped stone with such eerie precision that nature itself becomes an architect. The monument sprawls across the seabed at depths ranging from 16 to 25 meters. Its largest structure 150 meters long, 40 meters wide, and 27 meters tall, composed of sandstone and mudstone. And when divers first beheld its sweeping staircases, its flat terraces, its angular right angles and sharp edges, they thought of ziggurats, pyramids, or ceremonial plazas. Echoes of architecture familiar on land but strange beneath the sea. And speculation erupted that this was the sunken remnant of a lost civilization, perhaps thousands of years older than any known culture in Japan, a rival to Atlantis or Lemuria, preserved in silence beneath the waves. Proponents of this theory, led by marine geologist Masaaki Kimura, argue that the structures bear unmistakable marks of human modification. Cleanly cut steps, roads, water channels, even what seems to be a massive stone face or carving resembling a turtle or human figure. Features that suggest intentional design rather than random geology. And Kimura has mapped the site extensively, identifying what he claims are avenues, plazas, altars, and pyramidal forms, as if Yonaguni was once a city before the sea claimed it, perhaps 10,000 years ago, when lower sea levels might have left the area dry land at the end of the last ice age, a time when Orthodox history tells us Japan was inhabited only by hunter-gatherers with no monumental architecture. If Kimura is right, then Yonaguni rewrites not only Japanese history, but global prehistory, suggesting advanced societies existed long before the rise of Mesopotamia or Egypt, their traces erased by the rising seas. Critics, however, argue that the monument is simply a natural formation, the product of tectonic uplift and the fracturing of sandstone, which tends to break into blocky, geometric shapes, producing what look like terraces and steps without human intervention.
A process well documented in geology, and they note that the ocean currents around Yonaguni are strong, making diving difficult and leading to distorted perceptions of scale and form. While the supposed carvings and faces can be dismissed as pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist, just as faces are seen in clouds or animals in rock formations. For skeptics, the allure of Yonaguni lies less in evidence than in the perennial human fascination with lost civilizations, a desire to find Atlantean echoes in every anomaly, a narrative that repeats whenever natural oddities confront the limits of our imagination. Yet the site refuses to settle into certainty, for divers return with photographs that seem to confirm artistry. An archway here, a pillar there, straight lines and 90-degree corners too precise for randomness. And the monument's sheer scale defies easy dismissal, leading some to suggest a hybrid explanation, a natural formation later modified by humans, shaped into ceremonial platforms or sacred spaces by an unknown people long before written records. Just as megalithic builders across the world adapted natural stone into temples, shrines, and fortresses. If so, then who were these people, and what fate befell them? Speculation ranges from an early maritime culture of the Jomon period, experimenting with stonework far beyond what we thought possible, to remnants of a forgotten Pacific civilization, perhaps the same that seeded myths of Mu or Lemuria, a vast sunken continent once imagined to stretch across the Pacific, whose fragments linger in Polynesian lore and Japanese tradition. For the Ryukyu Islands themselves are steeped in myth, stories of gods descending to islands rising from the sea, of dragon palaces beneath the waves, of worlds lost to watery depths. Could it be that Yonaguni is the myth made real, a drowned shrine to deities now buried beneath currents? And if so, what rituals were once performed on its terraces? What chants echoed off its walls? What fires burned upon its platforms before the ocean extinguished them?
Scientific studies have yet to answer these questions, for the site is politically entangled, with Japanese scholars cautious about claims that would disrupt established narratives, while international media leap to sensational comparisons with Atlantis, each side exaggerating to suit its agenda, leaving the truth adrift somewhere between skepticism and wonder. Divers speak of an uncanny presence at Yonaguni, of descending through clear blue waters to behold a massive staircase rising from the seabed, of swimming past walls so straight they feel architectural, of brushing their hands across edges that seem chiseled by intent, and in those moments, skepticism falters, and the imagination awakens. Could this have been a temple to sea gods, a gathering place for astronomer priests who track the stars reflected in the waves, a fortress guarding a prehistoric trade route across Asia, or even a sanctuary swallowed by a flood remembered dimly in myths of deluge? If Yonaguni is truly man-made, then its age would predate not only Japan's earliest known structures, but most of the world's recognized civilizations, aligning instead with the mysterious era when global sea levels rose dramatically, drowning coastlines and reshaping human memory, an era remembered in flood myths from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas. Perhaps Yonaguni is the Japanese echo of that global trauma, a reminder that whole cities, whole cultures may sleep beneath the oceans, their ruins waiting to awaken our understanding. And yet, perhaps the true mystery of Yonaguni is not whether it is natural or artificial, but why it continues to captivate, why divers return year after year, why scholars argue, why myths resurface whenever stone meets sea, as if the monument itself is a riddle posed by the earth, daring us to confront the fragility of what we know, to imagine civilizations older than memory, to face the possibility that history is not a straight line, but a palimpsest of forgotten chapters drowned and erased, leaving behind only ambiguous ruins in the deep. The waves crash endlessly against Yonaguni's cliffs as they have for millennia, while beneath them, in silent twilight, the monument waits, its steps leading nowhere, its plazas echoing with the absence of voices, its stones whispering only through bubbles and currents, daring divers, dreamers, and seekers to decide whether they stand before the work of gods, men, or the inscrutable artistry of nature itself. And in that decision lies the enduring mystery of the Yonaguni Monument, Japan's underwater ruins, where history, geology, and myth entwine in an eternal dance beneath the sea.
The Oracle of Delphi, Voices from the Earth. High upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the rocks glisten in the Greek sun and the winds whisper through olive groves, lies Delphi, once believed to be the navel of the world, the Omphalos stone marking the very center of creation, a place where God spoke through the earth and mortals came from across the known world to seek guidance. For here resided the oracle of Apollo, the Pythia, a woman whose trance-born utterances shaped the fate of kings and empires, generals and philosophers, and whose enigmatic words still echo across time. A mystery of both geology and divinity that continues to provoke awe and speculation. The sanctuary of Delphi grew around a sacred fissure in the rock, where legend said Apollo slew the serpent Python, establishing his temple above the beast's rotting body. And from that wound in the earth issued vapors, pneuma, divine breath that carried the voice of the god, drawing the chosen priestess into ecstasy. Her words incomprehensible, yet interpreted by male priests into verse and riddles that mortals scrambled to decipher. Was she speaking the will of Apollo, or the mutterings of her own delirium, or the product of gases seeping from the rocks below, intoxicating her into visions that seemed divine? Archaeology has revealed that beneath the temple lie fault lines, geological fractures, where subterranean gases could indeed seep upward, including ethylene, known to induce trance states, euphoria, and altered consciousness, lending scientific weight to ancient accounts of the oracle's inspiration. And yet this explanation does not dispel the mystery, but deepens it.
For why would the Greeks, in choosing a site for Apollo's most sacred sanctuary, select precisely a place where geology and myth entwine so perfectly, as if they knew the Earth's secrets far better than we credit? The oracle's power was unrivaled, consulted before wars, colonization ventures, political reforms. Croesus of Lydia sought her guidance before waging war on Persia, and she replied, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." A prophecy fulfilled, though tragically it was his own. And such riddling ambiguity was the oracle's hallmark. Her pronouncements both true and unfathomable, forcing mortals into choices that revealed as much about themselves as about destiny. Some historians argue this ambiguity was deliberate, the priesthood manipulating language to maintain power, while others see in it a reflection of the numinous, the impossibility of simple answers when dealing with divine will. Yet the archaeological remains of Delphi, the temple ruins, the treasuries built by grateful city-states, the stadium and theater where rituals and games accompanied prophecy, speak of a place not merely religious but cosmopolitan, where wealth, politics, and faith intermingled, and where the voice of a woman, rare in the ancient world, held supreme authority, albeit mediated by male interpreters. What did the Pythia herself feel as she sat upon her tripod over the chasm, inhaling the earth's breath, her body trembling, her mind aflame with visions, her tongue loosing syllables that others would shape into history? Was she victim, tool, or vessel of genuine transcendence? Skeptics claim she was manipulated, her frenzy staged, her words contrived. Yet recent geological studies confirm fissures in the limestone releasing gases even today, making it entirely possible that natural forces enhanced her altered states, aligning science with myth in uncanny fashion. Still others wonder if the oracle tapped not just chemical intoxication, but a deeper reservoir of human potential, a psychic state where intuition magnified into prophecy, where subconscious pattern recognition and heightened perception created utterances that seemed divine, perhaps amplified by the symbolic environment, the rituals, the belief of those who listened. For belief itself has power, and when kings and commoners alike awaited every syllable as if it were law, the words gained weight beyond their origin, shaping reality through conviction. And what of the Omphalos stone, the symbolic navel of the world, carved with a net-like pattern, guarded in Apollo's temple? Was it merely symbol, or did it represent something more? A meteorite, perhaps, a relic fallen from the heavens, a marker of cosmic significance, drawing energy from celestial and terrestrial alignments. Scholars of archaeoastronomy note that Delphi's layout corresponds to constellations, that Apollo's cult was bound to solar cycles, that rituals there may have encoded astronomical knowledge alongside prophecy, embedding cosmic order into sacred practice, as if the oracle was not only a mouthpiece of Apollo, but a living calendar, her utterances tied to cycles of stars and earth. Over time, Delphi became not only a religious sanctuary, but a repository of cultural memory, where histories were inscribed, alliances forged, treasures stored. And yet, as empires shifted and faiths changed, the oracle's voice faded, silenced first by Rome's dominance, then by the rise of Christianity, until the sanctuary lay in ruins, its stones scattered, its temple toppled, its fissure sealed. And still the question lingers, was the Pythia truly touched by divinity, or by geology, or by the alchemy of belief, environment, and ritual? Some whisper darker possibilities, that the gases not only induced visions, but connected the priestess to deeper layers of consciousness, tapping into something collective, archetypal, a wellspring of humanity's hidden mind, explaining how her riddles resonated across generations. Others suggest that Delphi was chosen not by chance, but by ancient knowledge of Earth's energies, ley lines, or geomagnetic fields, places where the boundary between worlds is thin, and that the oracle's trance was a genuine crossing between human and divine realms, her voice carrying not hallucination, but transmission.
Even today, visitors to Delphi speak of a strange presence, a sense of awe that lingers among the ruins, as if the stones themselves remember, as if the earth still hums faintly with the breath that once carried Apollo's words. And perhaps that is the oracle's truest mystery, that her voice was never hers alone, but the voice of place, of belief, of earth and God intertwined. And that in her cryptic answers, humanity learned not certainty, but humility, the knowledge that the future is never given, only glimpsed, shaped as much by interpretation as by destiny. And so Delphi remains, a ruin yet alive, a silence filled with echoes, a place where voices from the earth once spoke and may yet speak again. If we listen with the same wonder as those who came before us, seeking answers and finding instead.
The Terracotta Army, eternal guardians of a silent emperor. When in 1974, farmers digging a well in Shanxi province struck the hardened clay fragments of what seemed like ancient statues, they could not have imagined that they had pierced the veil of one of history's most breathtaking revelations, the buried army of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, a silent host of more than 8,000 life-sized warriors interred in eternal vigilance, guarding the tomb of a ruler whose ambition was nothing less than immortality itself, and whose legacy is written not only in conquest and unification, but in mystery, secrecy, and the strange convergence of art, technology, and death that continues to baffle us even today. The Terracotta Army, now considered one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, was not merely a funerary decoration, but a staggering feat of labor and vision. Thousands of individualized faces, each with distinct expressions, hairstyles, armor, and weapons, standing in formation as if awaiting orders. An army frozen in clay, yet radiating vitality. And beneath this spectacle lies an enigma that refuses to yield. Why such extravagance? Why such precision? Why such secrecy that even ancient records scarcely whisper of their existence? And what else remains hidden beneath the emperor's burial mound, still unopened, still forbidding exploration, surrounded by rumors of deadly traps and rivers of liquid mercury set to flow within its sealed chambers? Archaeology has revealed only fragments of this immense necropolis, for the Terracotta Army lies outside the central tomb, in vast pits where warriors, archers, cavalry, and chariots stand in rank upon rank, accompanied by officers, musicians, acrobats, and even animals, as if the emperor sought to replicate the entire empire underground, a microcosm of his realm carried with him into eternity. Theories abound as to how such a monumental project was achieved, for it is estimated that more than 700,000 workers labored for decades, and yet the technology used to mass-produce such detailed, individualized figures suggests a sophistication far beyond what we imagine of the 3rd century BCE. Some scholars pointing to assembly line methods, modular construction of bodies with customized heads, advanced kilns capable of firing life-sized figures without cracking, and pigments whose brilliance has since faded but once colored the army in vibrant hues, now lost except for fleeting traces that crumble upon exposure to air. Among these mysteries lies the question of the weapons once held by these warriors, many made of bronze but showing a level of preservation astonishing for their age. Their surfaces gleaming as if untouched by time, leading to speculation of advanced anti-rust treatments, possibly involving chromium oxide, which would predate the known use of such technology by millennia, suggesting either a lost metallurgical science or an accidental discovery that we still struggle to replicate fully. And here, the line between archaeology and speculation blurs, inviting whispers of forgotten knowledge, ancient experimentation, perhaps even technologies deliberately concealed by the emperor's engineers, who, according to legend, were buried alive within the tomb to ensure its secrets never escaped. The greatest mystery, however, lies beneath the unopened burial mound itself. a pyramid-shaped hill larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza in base dimensions, never excavated due to fears of irreparable damage and the warnings of ancient texts like Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, which speak of a tomb modeled after the cosmos, its ceiling studded with pearls representing stars, its floor flowing with rivers and seas of mercury, pumped and channeled through elaborate systems to create a miniature universe for the emperor's soul to inhabit. Modern surveys have indeed detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil, lending chilling weight to these accounts, raising questions about the scale of ancient engineering, the toxicity of the environment, and whether the tomb itself is not merely a burial site but a sealed machine of ritual and power, never meant to be disturbed. Was Qin Shi Huang obsessed only with the afterlife, or did he believe he could harness cosmic forces through this subterranean kingdom, achieving in death what eluded him in life, the conquest of mortality? His quest for immortality is well recorded, from alchemical experiments with mercury-laden elixirs that ironically hastened his death, to expeditions in search of the mythical Isles of the Immortals. And the Terracotta army can be seen as the culmination of this obsession, a grand insurance against the uncertainties of the spirit world, a shield of clay to repel whatever dangers lay beyond. Yet deeper enigmas persist. Why are some figures unfinished, as if work was suddenly halted? Why do traces of foreign influence appear in the style and technology, leading some scholars to suggest contact with Hellenistic art after Alexander's campaigns reached Central Asia? Could artisans from the West have contributed to the lifelike realism of the statues, making the Terracotta army not merely a Chinese wonder, but a cross-cultural mystery? And what of the legends of booby traps, crossbows rigged to fire upon intruders, mechanisms set to collapse chambers, secrets encoded in architecture itself? Did Qin Shi Huang's engineers truly devise systems of defense so advanced that even today archaeologists hesitate to penetrate his central tomb? Speculative thinkers go further, imagining the tomb not merely as a grave but as a vault of knowledge, containing texts, artifacts, and technologies deliberately buried, awaiting rediscovery, perhaps explaining the emperor's absolute secrecy and the silence of records surrounding the project, as if its revelation could upend not only his world but ours. Others weave more esoteric interpretations, suggesting the Terracotta army represents not only soldiers but guardians of thresholds, protectors against spiritual forces, their placement echoing ritual cosmology, their very material, clay from the earth, symbolizing a link between man, soil, and eternity, as if Qin Shi Huang sought to bind his essence to the land of China itself, ensuring that as long as the figure stood, so too would his empire endure. And here lies another riddle, the army's individuality, no two faces alike, as though each soldier were a portrait of a real man, perhaps artisans immortalized in clay, or actual soldiers transmuted into symbolic guardians, raising unsettling questions about whether these were mere artistic flourishes or deliberate attempts to capture human essence, an early form of symbolic immortality. Today, as visitors walk among the pits, gazing at ranks of silent warriors, there is a palpable sense of awe, as if the figures still wait, still serve, their mission unfulfilled until their emperor awakens. And perhaps that is the true enigma, that the Terracotta army is not merely a relic of the past, but a living mystery, guardians not of a dead king, but of a secret that remains entombed, resisting our every effort to unveil it, reminding us that even in an age of satellites and science, there are places where silence reigns and ancient ambitions still hold sway. For beneath that mound of earth, sealed in darkness, lies a secret that has endured for over 2,000 years, a secret guarded by clay faces that stare unblinking at eternity. And until the day we dare to open the emperor's tomb, the Terracotta army will remain what it has always been, eternal guardians of a silent emperor, standing watch over mysteries we are not yet ready to confront. The Vinland map. Vikings before Columbus? When in 1965, Yale University unveiled to the world what appeared to be an unassuming parchment fragment, the so-called Vinland map, Few could have predicted the storm it would unleash across the fields of history, cartography, and national pride. For this ink-etched relic seemed to suggest something almost heretical to the prevailing narrative, that Norse seafarers had charted lands across the Atlantic centuries before Columbus ever set sail, and that the shadow of Viking longships stretched not merely to Greenland but to a place labeled Vinland, lying unmistakably where North America should be. A revolution that would shatter the cherished notion of Columbus as discoverer of the New World, and force a reconsideration of how knowledge traveled, how maps encoded secrets, and how history itself might have been rewritten in whispers of ink and parchment. The map, drawn on calfskin vellum and tentatively dated to the mid-15th century, shows Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Atlantic Islands with surprising detail. But it is the western landmass marked Vinland that ignited passions, aligning eerily with sagas of Leif Erikson's voyage to fertile new lands around the year 1000. Sagas long dismissed as myth until archaeological discoveries at L'Anse Meadows in Newfoundland proved Norse presence in North America undeniable. And suddenly the map seemed to provide not only corroboration, but visual proof that Europeans knew of Vinland centuries before Columbus's crossing. Yet from the beginning, doubt clung to the artifact like a shadow. For the Vinland map's ink appeared unusual under chemical analysis, showing traces of anatase, a crystalline form of titanium dioxide not believed to have been synthesized before the 20th century, leading many to denounce the map as a modern forgery, a clever hoax crafted to destabilize conventional narratives, perhaps by an overzealous antiquarian in the 20th century who wished to give tangible form to the Viking sagas. Still, defenders argued that anatase could occur naturally in trace amounts or result from later contamination, and the battle over authenticity became as fierce as any fought with sword or sail. Beyond the scientific wrangling, the map invites deeper mysteries. If authentic, how did its anonymous maker know of Vinland? How did such knowledge travel from the Norse explorers of the 11th century to a European cartographer of the 15th? And why does no other map from the same period acknowledge this western land?
Some scholars suggest that Norse settlements in Greenland persisted longer than previously thought, maintaining contact with Europe and transmitting stories of Vinland. Others imagine that monastic scribes preserved oral accounts in hidden codices, embedding them within maps circulated among select scholars, hinting at a clandestine current of geographic awareness deliberately suppressed or overlooked. The parchment itself has been dated to the early 15th century through radiocarbon analysis, lending authenticity to its material, if not its ink. Yet even this finding complicates matters, for it implies that if the map is forged, it was drawn on medieval vellum, a forgery of unusual sophistication, requiring access to rare blank parchment and the cunning to age it convincingly. The map's provenance is murky, surfacing in the 20th century through a Swiss dealer connected to dubious manuscripts. And skeptics seize on this shadowy trail as proof of deception. But mystery often hides in shadows, and the very absence of clear origins fuels the allure, inviting speculation that the map was preserved in secret collections, concealed by church or state, withheld from public knowledge because its implications threatened entrenched narratives of discovery, empire, and legitimacy. For if Europeans other than Columbus knew of lands across the Atlantic, the entire edifice of imperial claims, papal bulls dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal, national myths of heroic discovery would stand on shakier ground, and history itself would bear the mark of deliberate obfuscation. Yet the Vinland map is more than an academic controversy. It is a cipher, a question inscribed in ink, asking us to confront the porous boundary between myth and history, between forgery and revelation, between what we want to believe and what the evidence will allow. Some speculative thinkers go further, wondering whether the map represents not only Norse knowledge, but traces of an even older tradition, perhaps inherited from lost seafaring cultures. For the precision of certain coastlines seems uncanny, suggesting observation rather than rumor. Did the Vikings themselves inherit maps or navigation lore from predecessors now forgotten, their memory preserved only in artifacts like this contested chart?
Others look at the map's symbolic features, the placement of islands, the curious inscriptions, and detect layers of meaning, codes or esoteric geographies embedded by its maker, perhaps intended for initiatives who knew how to read between the lines. And in this sense, the Vinland map becomes less a record of coastlines than a palimpsest of hidden knowledge, part of a tradition of maps that encode myth, power, and cosmology as much as geography. Whether genuine or forged, the map has forced us to re-examine the Viking sagas with fresh eyes, recognizing that what was once dismissed as legend may carry kernels of truth, and that memory preserved in story can outlast the skepticism of centuries, surfacing at last in ink upon parchment. And so the Vinland map remains suspended between worlds, neither wholly accepted nor wholly rejected, its authenticity a puzzle unsolved, its significance undeniable. For even as chemical tests, paleographic analyses, and scholarly debates rage, the map continues to whisper its tantalizing message, that long before Columbus set sail under the Spanish crown, others had crossed, had seen, had charted, and perhaps had chosen to keep their knowledge secret, leaving only traces for us to decipher. To stand before the Vinland map today is to feel the weight of uncertainty, the pull of competing truths, the allure of a story too important to be left unquestioned. And whether it is the most audacious forgery of the modern age or the most extraordinary survival of medieval cartography, it is above all a reminder that history is not a closed book, but a contested landscape, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries lie not in what we know, but in what we cannot prove, in the shadows where ink, parchment, and human ambition intertwine.
The cave paintings of Lascaux. Messages from prehistoric minds. Deep in the Dordogne Valley of southwestern France, hidden beneath the earth until 4 curious teenagers and their dogs stumbled upon it in 1940, lies a world both alien and achingly familiar. The painted caverns of Lascaux, where prehistoric minds, 37,000 years removed from ours, left behind visions that defy simple explanation. Herds of charging aurochs, elegant deer, galloping horses, enigmatic bison, strange half-human figures, abstract signs and dots, all executed with breathtaking skill, vibrant colors, and haunting vitality, preserved in the darkness of limestone chambers as if time itself conspired to safeguard these fragile messages from the deep past. The discovery of Lascaux electrified the modern world, for here was not the crude scrawling of primitives, but an explosion of artistry and symbolism, a prehistoric Sistine chapel whose ceilings and walls teem with more than 600 painted animals and thousands of engraved lines, rendered with perspective, shading, and movement that reveal not only talent, but vision, intention, and an inner life we struggle to grasp. Archaeologists have long debated the purpose of these paintings. Were they mere decoration? Hunting magic meant to conjure success? Shamanic visions born of trance and ritual? Or something far more complex? A symbolic language straddling the boundary between communication and spirituality? The animals themselves are telling. Some species, like reindeer, the mainstay of Ice Age diets, are largely absent, while powerful, dangerous creatures such as bulls, bison, and horses dominate, suggesting symbolic importance beyond sustenance, perhaps embodiments of spiritual totems, mythic beings, or cosmic forces. In one chamber known as the Hall of the Bulls, the colossal forms of aurochs, their horns exaggerated and curved, charge across the walls, overlapping in layers as if painted in ritual succession, each generation adding to the chorus of imagery, while nearby, cryptic signs, dots, lines, branching forms accompany the animals, teasing us with the possibility of proto-writing.
A symbolic system whose meaning is lost yet tantalizingly present, a whisper of language before language. In the Shaft of the Dead Man, one of the most enigmatic panels depicts a wounded bison with its entrails spilling, a bird-headed human figure lying prone, and a bird perched on a staff, An almost narrative scene unique in Paleolithic art, provoking speculation that it encodes myth, ritual sacrifice, or shamanic death and rebirth. Here, the veil between art and story thins, suggesting that Lascaux was not merely a gallery, but a theater of sacred drama, enacted in flickering torchlight, accompanied by chants, drums, the echoing voices of communities communing with forces larger than themselves. Scientific analysis of pigments reveals sophisticated techniques, ochres ground to fine powders, manganese dioxide producing deep blacks, charcoal for outlines, binders of fat or blood, application by brushes, pads, even blowing paint through hollow bones like airbrushes, all indicating experimentation and mastery. And the placement of paintings deep within the cave, in chambers accessible only by crawling or climbing, implies intentional restriction, as if entry into these painted sanctuaries was itself a rite, reserved for initiates, not the casual eyes of all. Recent studies propose even more astonishing possibilities, that the geometric signs scattered across caves in France and Spain may form a code representing animal behaviors, seasonal cycles, or calendrical knowledge, a proto-writing system predating Sumerian tablets by tens of millennia, evidence that symbolic thought and notation were alive long before civilization arose, that the seeds of writing, religion, and science lay gestating in flickers of firelight on cave walls. And yet, Lascaux resists definitive answers. The more we uncover, the deeper the mystery grows. Some theorists argue the caves were immersive ritual spaces, where flickering light made painted animals seem to move, inducing altered states that allowed shamans to cross into spirit worlds. Others suggest the caves functioned as memory palaces, where flickering light made painted animals seem to move, inducing altered states that allowed shamans to cross into spirit worlds. Encoding knowledge of the natural world, migration patterns, or celestial cycles in visual form, the first archives of humanity's mind. There are even those who speculate that the caves were not merely symbolic, but functional observatories. The animals aligned with constellations, the dots representing lunar cycles, transforming Lascaux into a prehistoric planetarium where Earth and sky merged in symbolic communion. More speculative still are the whispers that such sophistication hints at forgotten cultures, perhaps remnants of a lost tradition of symbolic knowledge carried through oral myth, resurfacing in paintings as a desperate preservation of wisdom before cataclysmic change. The enigma is compounded by the fragility of the site. After its discovery, thousands flocked to see it, their breath and bacteria damaging the delicate ecosystem, forcing closure in 1963, and since then the cave has been plagued by fungal invasions and microclimatic instability. As if the paintings resist prolonged human intrusion, as if they are meant to remain veiled, glimpsed but not possessed. Today, replicas allow visitors to experience Lascaux's art without endangering the originals, but nothing can match the eerie awe of standing in the true cavern, surrounded by images born of minds so ancient yet so human. Images that seem to reach across the abyss of time to whisper that we are not so different, that even in the Ice Age we sought meaning, beauty, transcendence. And perhaps that is Lascaux's greatest mystery. Not whether the paintings were ritual, magic, or communication, but that they remind us of the depth of human consciousness. That 37,000 years ago, we were already storytellers, dreamers, seekers of the sacred, already trying to fix the fleeting impermanence, to touch eternity with pigment on stone. To gaze upon Lascaux is to feel a kinship that words cannot express, to sense the minds behind the animals, the hands pressing against the rock, the breath blowing pigment into form, the eyes gleaming in torchlight as images sprang to life. And in that moment, the cavern ceases to be a tomb of prehistoric art and becomes a mirror, reflecting back our own restless search for meaning, for connection, for messages in the dark, messages left by prehistoric minds who, across vast gulfs of time, still speak to us in silence. The Ark of the Covenant, lost relic of power.
Among the most enduring enigmas in the annals of sacred history is the fate of the Ark of the Covenant. A gilded chest of acacia wood described in the Hebrew Bible as constructed to hold the stone tablets of the law received by Moses upon Mount Sinai, yet invested with power so terrible and divine that it leveled armies, struck down the impious, and radiated the very presence of Yahweh himself, making it less an artifact and more a conduit of the transcendent. A relic of power whose disappearance remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of antiquity. The ark, as described in Exodus, was no ordinary container. Overlaid with pure gold inside and out, capped by the mercy seat with two cherubim facing one another, their wings overshadowing the divine throne, it was borne on golden poles by Levites, never to be touched directly on pain of death. And wherever it went, the Israelites believed God's presence dwelt with them. It marched before them into battle, felling walls as at Jericho, turning rivers back, and filling the tabernacle with unearthly radiance. Its sanctity was so great that only the high priest could approach it, and then only once a year on Yom Kippur. Yet somewhere in the labyrinth of time, this supreme relic vanished. Was it carried into Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar's conquest in 587 BCE? Hidden away by priests before Jerusalem fell? Spirited to the deserts of Arabia, the mountains of Ethiopia, or perhaps into secret vaults beneath the Temple Mount? Theories abound, each more tantalizing than the last. Ethiopian tradition, preserved in the Kebra Nagast, claims the ark was taken by Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and brought to Axum, where it remains hidden within the Church of St. Mary of Zion, guarded by a single monk whose eyes alone may gaze upon it, though none from outside are permitted. Yet pilgrims and scholars alike recount the profound reverence surrounding the site. And Ethiopian liturgy continues to treat the ark not as legend but living presence.
Others believe the ark was concealed by priests in hidden chambers beneath Solomon's temple, perhaps within labyrinthine tunnels still unexplored, waiting until the appointed time to be revealed, though access to the Temple Mount remains politically and religiously fraught, preventing excavation. Some suggest it lies beneath Mount Nebo, where Moses glimpsed the Promised Land, for the book of Maccabees tells of the prophet Jeremiah hiding the ark in a cave there, sealing it until the day of God's restoration. Yet no cave has ever yielded such a treasure. Meanwhile, medieval legends weave the ark into the lore of the Knights Templar, who excavated beneath the Temple Mount during the Crusades and were rumored to have unearthed relics of unspeakable power, perhaps even the ark itself, carrying it back to Europe where it became the inspiration for countless Grail romances, entwining Jewish tradition with Christian mystery. Skeptics, of course, dismiss such accounts as myth layered upon myth. Yet the sheer persistence of the ark legend across cultures suggests that something profound lies behind it, whether tangible object or symbolic archetype. Archaeologists point out that acacia and gold could survive if properly preserved, but the volatile political and religious storms of the Near East make it improbable such a relic endured intact. Others note that biblical descriptions resemble Egyptian ritual chests, suggesting the ark was part of a broader cultural milieu of sacred objects embodying divine presence, its power less supernatural than symbolic. And yet, the ark resists reduction to mere symbol, for the biblical text repeatedly insists on its tangible potency, lethal to those who mishandled it, capable of emitting a consuming fire, a description that to modern eyes recalls radiation, electrical discharge, or some form of lost technology, leading fringe theorists to propose that the ark was more than wood and gold, that it was a capacitor of immense energy, perhaps designed to store and unleash electrical power, an artifact of technology beyond its age, either divinely inspired or inherited from forgotten knowledge. Could the ark have been a machine, a sacred battery radiating lethal force? Its golden layers and cherubim functioning as conductors, its poles as insulators, its presence a literal current of destructive power.
Such speculation borders on science fiction, yet it lingers because the Ark, as described, behaves not as a passive chest, but an active presence, a dangerous engine of holiness requiring constant ritual to contain. Others, more esoteric, interpret the Ark as a metaphysical instrument, a device for communication with the divine, a throne of God where heaven touched earth. Its loss, therefore, more than physical. It marked a rupture between the human and the transcendent, a silence after which prophecy faltered and temples fell. To this day, the Ark lives on in religious imagination, in Jewish thought as the lost heart of the covenant, in Christian typology as a foreshadowing of Christ, in Islamic tradition as a relic known as the Tabut el-Sakanika, a chest of tranquility sent by God, in popular culture as the stuff of Indiana Jones and speculative thrillers, and in the hidden longings of seekers who dream of its rediscovery. Should it ever be found, if the Ark lies waiting in some guarded chamber, some cave, some cloistered church, the consequences would be earth-shaking, religiously and politically explosive. A convergence of faith and archaeology that could reconfigure our sense of history. Yet perhaps its greatest power lies in its absence, in the way its loss keeps humanity searching, yearning, projecting our fears and hopes upon it. Was the Ark destroyed, dismantled for its gold, or does it endure, waiting to step once more into the light? Until that day, the Ark of the Covenant remains what it has always been, a lost relic of power, a mystery of wood, gold, and divine fire, hidden somewhere between history and myth, guarding not only the law, but the secret of why we seek the holy in objects, why we yearn for presence in matter, why we believe that somewhere in the shadows of the earth lies a chest that once contained the voice of God.
Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, impossible stones of the Andes. High on the desolate altiplano of Bolivia, where icy winds sweep across the Andean plateau and the thin air blurs the horizon between earth and sky, lie the ruins of Tiwanaku and its enigmatic satellite Puma Punku. Sites so ancient and so baffling that they have become both a cornerstone of Andean identity and a riddle that continues to defy archaeologists, engineers, and dreamers alike. For within their fractured stones rests a story that seems impossible, a tale of precision architecture and forgotten civilizations that forces us to ask, how could such monumental feats have been achieved at a time when metallurgy was primitive, the wheel was unknown in South America, and beasts of burden were limited to the humble llama? Tiwanaku, often hailed as the cradle of Andean civilization, flourished between 500 and 1000 CE, long before the rise of the Inca Empire, and its ruins sprawl across what was once a sacred metropolis centered around the Acapana Pyramid, the Kalasasaya Temple, and the enigmatic Gateway of the Sun, a monolithic arch carved from a single block of andesite, etched with intricate iconography that many interpret as astronomical calendars or cosmological maps. But just to the southwest lies Puma Punku, a place that magnifies the mystery tenfold. For here lie megaliths weighing up to 130 tons, scattered as though toppled by some cataclysm, yet shaped into forms so precise they appear machine-cut, with right angles, interlocking joints, and surfaces polished flat as glass, sparking endless debate over whether the ancient builders possessed knowledge lost to time. The famous H-blocks of Puma Punku, shaped like three-dimensional puzzle pieces, fit together in complex arrangements that suggest modular construction, as though the builders had designed a vast Lego-like system from stone. Yet conventional tools such as stone hammers and copper chisels seem insufficient to achieve such exactness. Modern engineers examining the blocks marvel at tolerances so tight that blades or paper cannot slip between them, leading to speculation that advanced methods of stone shaping were at play. The famous H-blocks of Puma Punku, shaped like three-dimensional puzzle pieces, fit together in complex arrangements that suggest modular construction, as though the builders had designed a vast Lego-like system from stone. Yet conventional tools such as stone hammers and copper chisels seem insufficient to achieve such exactness. Modern engineers examining the blocks marvel at tolerances so tight that blades or paper cannot slip between them, leading to speculation that advanced methods of stone shaping were at play.
Orthodox archaeology maintains that Tiwanaku was indeed a highly organized society, capable of mobilizing labor on a massive scale, and that the precision seen at Punku is the product of skillful stoneworkers using techniques we underestimate, such as repeated pecking, sanding with abrasives, and the use of simple plumb lines and string grids. Yet even proponents of this view admit the sheer difficulty of transporting and shaping such massive blocks, especially since the quarry from which many stones originated lies some 10 kilometers away across the plain, with others sourced from mountains more than 50 kilometers distant, raising the question, how did a pre-industrial culture move stones weighing dozens or even hundreds of tons without wheels, cranes, or draft animals capable of bearing the load? Some hypothesize the use of reed boats across Lake Titicaca, combined with rolling logs, ramps, and human muscle, while others insist the logistics remain daunting even today. The debate intensifies when considering the collapsed state of Punku. Scholars believe the site was destroyed by an earthquake or sudden catastrophe, leaving its precision-cut blocks scattered in disarray, while local Aymara legends speak of gods who assembled the city in a single night, raising walls with thunder and lightning, suggesting the builders were more than human, or at least aided by powers beyond ordinary comprehension. Fringe theorists from Eric von Daniken onward have famously seized on Punku as evidence of ancient contact with extraterrestrials, pointing to the machine-like cuts as beyond the reach of hand tools, the H-blocks as reminiscent of industrial prefabrication, and the site's apparent astronomical alignments as a sign of cosmic knowledge. While mainstream scholars reject such ideas, they cannot entirely dispel the allure, for the sheer strangeness of the stones invites explanations as bold as the ruins themselves. Other speculative theories propose that Tiwanaku and Punku preserve remnants of an even older civilization, perhaps one predating the last ice age, whose knowledge was lost in floods and upheavals remembered in myth, with Tiwanaku rebuilt atop much earlier foundations. Indeed, radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy have struggled to pin down precise origins, with some suggesting parts of the site could be thousands of years older than the Tiwanaku culture itself, dating back perhaps 12,000 years, aligning with Plato's Atlantis or South American flood myths, though such dates remain controversial. Adding to the enigma is the cosmological symbolism embedded in the architecture. The Gateway of the Sun portrays Viracocha, the great creator deity, surrounded by radiating motifs some interpret as a solar calendar, including leap years and astronomical cycles, while Punku's layout appears aligned to cardinal directions and solstices, suggesting advanced knowledge of the heavens. If so, the builders combined spiritual vision with engineering skill, encoding cosmology into stone. Archaeological excavations have unearthed ceramics, textiles, and evidence of a sophisticated society engaged in farming, irrigation, and trade across vast distances. Yet these everyday artifacts stand in striking contrast to the monumental stones, which seem out of proportion to their cultural context, as though two levels of technology or symbolism were at play, one rooted in agrarian life, the other reaching toward the transcendent. The mystery deepens with the discovery of unusual metals at the site, including copper clamps thought to have held blocks together, some containing traces of arsenic bronze, which would have been unusually advanced metallurgy for the era, hinting at experimental techniques lost after the civilization's collapse. As the Inca later claimed descent from Tiwanaku's builders, they too regarded the site as sacred, a place of origin where gods created the first humans, reinforcing the sense that Tiwanaku was no ordinary city, but a locus of myth and reality intertwined.
Modern visitors stand before the shattered blocks of Punku and sense both awe and incomprehension, for the stones radiate a feeling of forgotten mastery, as though mocking our assumptions about progress and regression in human history. Were the stones carved with techniques we have simply overlooked, or does their precision hint at something extraordinary? Was Punku a ceremonial site, a palace, or a temple to Viracocha? Was it destroyed by earthquake, flood, or perhaps deliberate dismantling? Or was it left unfinished, abandoned mid-construction as resources dwindled or calamity struck? Each theory, whether sober or speculative, only adds to the riddle. Perhaps the true key lies not in extraterrestrials or lost civilizations, but in acknowledging the ingenuity of ancient Andean peoples who, with patience, community, and vision, wrought marvels that modern eyes too often underestimate. Yet the possibility remains that Punku is more than archaeology. It is a fragment of a story humanity has not yet remembered, a chapter erased by time, a whisper from the high Andes telling us that the past was stranger, richer, and more complex than we dare imagine. Until the stones yield their full secret, Tiwanaku and Punku will remain what they have always been: impossible stones of the Andes, enduring monuments to mystery, guardians of a knowledge that slipped between the cracks of history, waiting for us to listen.
The crystal skulls, truth or forgery of forgotten technology. In the shadowy intersection between archaeology and myth stand the infamous crystal skulls, shimmering relics that seem to pulse with enigma. Their translucent visages carved from quartz and other crystalline materials. Objects that both fascinate and confound because they do not merely exist as artifacts but as conduits for stories of ancient wisdom, lost civilizations, and even extraterrestrial connections. And though museums, collectors, and adventurers have all claimed ownership of these strange skulls, the question lingers like an echo across time. Are these relics truly remnants of forgotten technology, preserved by cultures such as the Maya and the Aztec? Or are they clever forgeries crafted in later centuries to tantalize a world eager for mystery? The tale often begins with the most famous of them all, the so-called Mitchell-Hedges skull. Allegedly discovered in 1924 by the daughter of English adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges among the ruins of a Mayan temple in Belize. A life-size skull carved from a single block of clear quartz, complete with intricate details that seem anatomically precise, even featuring optical properties that bend and refract light through eye sockets and teeth in ways that mimic natural bone. According to legend, when held up to the light, the skull glows with an inner fire, as though imbued with spirit. And the story goes further, for those who have gazed upon it for long periods speak of visions, voices, or strange energies, as if the skull itself is a vessel of consciousness. Archaeologists, however, are far less enchanted. For analysis by institutions such as the Smithsonian and the British Museum has revealed tool marks consistent with modern rotary equipment, not the stone tools or abrasive sand techniques used by pre-Columbian artisans, suggesting that many, if not all, of the crystal skulls entered circulation in the 19th century, likely fabricated in Europe during a time of feverish fascination with exotic antiquities. Yet the controversy refuses to die, because despite skepticism, the craftsmanship remains astonishing, and questions linger over how even modern artisans could achieve such perfection in quartz. A material notoriously difficult to shape, prone to shattering under pressure, requiring steady, precise movements and diamond-tipped tools to achieve smooth surfaces and symmetry. Beyond questions of authenticity lies the layer of legend. In indigenous lore, particularly those attributed to the Maya, there are whispers of 13 skulls scattered across the world, each one containing a fragment of cosmic wisdom or memory, and when reunited, these skulls will reveal truths about humanity's origins and destiny, perhaps even serving as keys to survival in times of cataclysm.
A myth amplified in the late 20th century and woven into the fabric of New Age spirituality, which portrays the skulls as ancient computers, repositories of knowledge encoded within the crystalline lattice, much like modern data stored on silicon chips. And so speculation arises. Could quartz, with its known piezoelectric properties, actually retain or transmit information? Quartz powers our watches and radios, after all, vibrating with precise frequencies that stabilize technology. So perhaps the ancients, in ways we cannot yet comprehend, discovered how to use crystals as memory banks or spiritual transmitters. Theories expand further into the extraordinary. Some believe the skulls were gifts from extraterrestrials, beings who seeded humanity with knowledge and left behind tools to guide us. Others suggest they were forged by Atlanteans, the last echoes of a high civilization destroyed in a great flood, their technology buried in myth but surviving in crystalline relics. Still others see them as shamanic devices, carved in altered states of consciousness, meant to bridge the living and the dead, serving as oracular instruments through which spirits or gods could speak. What cannot be denied is the aura these skulls exude. Skeptics may call them Victorian forgeries, but when placed in ritual settings, lit by firelight or sunlight, their gaze is uncanny, their silence overwhelming, their presence potent enough to stir imagination into belief. Researchers such as Anna Mitchell Hedges, the adopted daughter who claimed to discover the most famous skull, fiercely defended its authenticity, insisting it held paranormal powers and once belonged to ancient priests. Her testimony, though doubted, captured public imagination, making the skull a celebrity in its own right, traveling the world for exhibitions, healings, and studies. Scientific tests on other skulls, such as those held by the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris and the British Museum in London, have traced their origins to modern workshops in Germany, particularly in the 19th century, when crystal carving was a thriving craft, suggesting that dealers may have fabricated skulls to meet European demand for exotic relics. Yet not all skulls have been definitively debunked, and the mystery persists, in part because of the stubborn question of why. Why choose the skull? Why imbue it with such perfection? Why cloak it in myths of prophecy and power, unless some deeper truth once lay behind the image? Even if they are forgeries, they have succeeded in transforming themselves into authentic cultural artifacts, not of ancient Mesoamerica perhaps, but of human longing for connection to mysteries larger than ourselves. The skulls, real or fake, have become catalysts for storytelling, symbols through which we explore the boundaries of science, faith, and imagination. And then there is the uncanny resonance with other crystal traditions. Ancient peoples worldwide revered crystals, from the Egyptians who buried quartz with their dead, to shamans who used stones for healing, to the legends of crystal towers powering Atlantis. Could the skulls be continuations of a global archetype, the human tendency to see in crystals not mere geology, but vessels of spirit? Some researchers argue that even if modern artisans carved the skulls, they might have been inspired by older traditions now lost, and thus the skulls still point us toward forgotten practices of crystal working that we have yet to rediscover. As we gaze into their translucent eyes, we confront a paradox. The skulls may be fakes, but their mystery is real. They may be carved with modern tools, yet they carry ancient weight. They may be inert quartz, but they awaken visions and myths that refuse to fade. Perhaps the real secret of the crystal skulls is not whether they are authentic relics of a vanished civilization, but why humanity needs them to be. Why we yearn to believe that objects can carry wisdom, that stones can speak, that the past might reach through the present to guide our future. And so the skulls endure in museums and private collections, in stories whispered by mystics, their smooth faces reflecting not just light, but our deepest fascination with the unknown, waiting for the day, if ever comes, when all 13 are gathered, and the truth, whether of technology, faith, or forgery, finally reveals itself.
The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, wonder that vanished without a trace. Of all the 7 wonders of the ancient world, none carry such a tantalizing mixture of beauty, legend, and absence as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a creation so enchanting that poets, travelers, and historians described it as a man-made paradise suspended in the heart of Mesopotamia, yet so elusive that no definitive trace of it has ever been found, leaving us with a wonder that might be the greatest riddle of antiquity. For how can one of the most celebrated achievements of human imagination, said to rival nature itself, vanish without leaving behind a single stone beyond dispute, a single foundation that all can agree upon? The story, repeated for centuries, paints a picture of towering terraces covered in lush greenery, trees cascading downward in verdant curtains, exotic plants imported from distant lands, streams of water flowing from one level to another as though mountains had been transplanted into the plains of Mesopotamia. And at the center of it all, a marvel of engineering that defied the arid climate of Babylon, where rainfall was scarce and the summer heat merciless. Yet this oasis was supposedly sustained by ingenious irrigation systems, perhaps Archimedean screws or hidden aqueducts, which lifted the life-giving waters of the Euphrates up to the gardens, making the desert bloom. The legend most often credits King Nebuchadnezzar II, the mighty ruler of Babylon, in the 6th century BCE, who allegedly built the gardens for his Median wife, Amytis, to remind her of the green mountains of her homeland. A romantic gesture of imperial scale, transforming longing into architecture, love into one of the 7 wonders. Ancient writers such as Strabo and Philo of Byzantium describe the gardens in vivid detail, and even centuries later, Greek historians spoke of their terraces, pillars, and irrigation marvels. Yet curiously, Babylonian records, otherwise rich with accounts of Nebuchadnezzar's building projects, remain silent on this wonder, as though the gardens were conjured not in bricks and mortar, but in the realm of imagination, raising the possibility that the Hanging Gardens were either lost, misattributed, or perhaps never existed at Babylon at all. Some scholars suggest that ancient writers confused Babylon with Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, where Sennacherib, a century earlier, boasted of creating magnificent gardens with elaborate irrigation, even inscribing in cuneiform the construction of aqueducts and canals that made the desert fertile. If this is true, then the Hanging Gardens might not have been Babylonian, but Assyrian, a case of mistaken geography in the retelling of history, with Sennacherib's achievements later woven into the legend of Nebuchadnezzar. Yet the allure of Babylon is hard to ignore, for the city itself was a marvel, with its massive walls, grand temples, and the famed Ishtar Gate, a world capital that seemed capable of any feat. And so the image of lush gardens hanging above its courtyards lingers in our imagination, too perfect to discard. Archaeologists who have excavated Babylon, most notably Robert Coldaway in the early 20th century, discovered vaulted structures and thick walls that some claimed might be the foundations of the gardens. But subsequent analysis has cast doubt, with others arguing that these remains were storerooms or parts of fortifications, not terraces of greenery. The Euphrates itself has shifted course over the millennia, perhaps erasing traces or burying them deep beneath silt, leaving the archaeologist's spade to scratch only the surface of mystery. And yet, speculation persists. If the gardens existed, how did the Babylonians manage the technological feat of irrigation? Did they use chain pumps or water screws centuries before Archimedes? Did they construct hidden reservoirs that harnessed hydraulic principles far beyond their era? Could they have employed knowledge now forgotten, techniques of water management that would astonish even modern engineers? Such questions invite more than historical curiosity. They inspire theories that stretch into the speculative, with some suggesting the gardens were more than horticulture, that they were symbolic recreations of cosmic mountains, sacred representations of order amidst chaos, designed to connect heaven and earth in a city already obsessed with ziggurats and celestial order. Others whisper of even stranger origins, proposing that the gardens were remnants of older, lost civilizations whose knowledge survived in fragments,
or that their description was influenced by tales carried along trade routes, blending real engineering marvels with myth until they crystallized into the legend of a wonder that may never have stood in one place at all. What fascinates is not only the possibility of the garden's physical existence, but their psychological power. For even if they were never built, they embody the human longing to master nature, to create paradise on earth, to defy environment and mortality with beauty that seems eternal. In this sense, the Hanging Gardens live regardless of archaeology, for they have already reshaped civilization's imagination, a symbol of what humanity dreams it can accomplish. And yet, there are still those who insist the stones lie hidden, awaiting discovery, buried beneath layers of time, perhaps near the ruins of Babylon or misattributed ruins of Nineveh, perhaps even under modern landscapes where rivers no longer flow as they once did. And each dig in Mesopotamia rekindles hope that some trace of irrigation channels, terrace foundations, or exotic pollen might at last confirm the reality of the wonder that vanished. Until then, the Hanging Gardens remain suspended in uncertainty, poised between truth and fable, engineering and poetry, their leaves forever green in the collective mind, their waters forever flowing in the corridors of legend. A reminder that some of history's greatest marvels may not need to be found to endure. They live in the mystery itself, in the tantalizing absence that compels us to keep searching, to keep imagining, to keep building our own gardens in the desert of time.